Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined by my co-host, one of my co-hosts, Dylan Barnas. Super happy to have Dylan back on. You had Jeff and I recently, and now it's back to Dylan today as we are going to be talking baseball. Baseball is back. Today is February 12th as we record this. It'll come out a little bit later in the week. The White Sox are officially in spring training mode. Pitchers and catchers had to officially report by today. A lot of them were already there. Plenty of prospects that have already been there working out over the past few weeks, but pitcher and catcher report date was today. Media availability started today with a bunch of White Sox guys being, shown online, throwing a lot of prospects in big league camp, which is super exciting for us as always. And it's just baseball, right? We're back to baseball. Dylan, how are you doing, first of all?
I'm good. The closer we are to baseball season, the better it is because, it's a great time. Even though the White Sox probably aren't going to be very good this year. I would be shocked if we won more than 67 games. But hey, baseball is fun. It's a game. I think that people need to just stop being so negative all the time and understand that at the end of the day, it is a game. But yeah, pitchers and catchers reported today, which means we are one step closer to opening day. I believe that's March 27th, 28th, sometime end of March.
Opening day, yeah. Yeah, it's exciting, man. I mean, this is the earliest, little fun fact for you. This is the earliest that opening day has been ever in Major League Baseball history, the official opening day. The Japan series obviously is an exception the week before, but the actual opening day for every team is on the 27th, which is the earliest ever after I think the 29th last year was one of the earliest as well. So it's baseball time. I'm with you. The negativity, we're done. The offseason's mostly in the past. The White Sox made another move this week. We can talk about briefly off the top, but it's going to be a fun year, and that's the way I look at it. There's going to be some real downs for sure. The team is still going to be struggling for much of the season, but a ton of young talent. We've seen the focus from the White Sox organization, from Chris Getz, from the media side, from the social media team. Like, the focus is these young guys. It's very clear that the organization is finally leaning into this kind of, you can call it whatever you want to call it. Yes, it's a rebuild, sure, but I like to look at it as leaning into the youth movement. That's what's happening, right? Like, the team is not good. They're coming off the worst season in baseball history. So let's focus on the prospects. Let's focus on the fact that there are 6 consensus top 100 prospects in the system now. Focus on the fact that, the system as a whole is top 5 in baseball, I think. Borderline, maybe some people have it, more top 8, but definitely top 10 easily in baseball as a farm system, with the pitching side of things being, top 3 in baseball, I think, at this point. I think it's hard to argue against that, honestly. So, it's a fun time. We're ready to get back into ball. And I think we're excited to just see what this young team looked like and see a very different type of team than we saw for most of last year.
Yep. I think that, like you said, the young guys coming up and even just like showing to the fans that like they're not just some scrubs that we've had coming up the last couple of years, like a Sevi Zavala, Carlos Perez, where they were like older guys who were career minor leaguers, but then were performing well in the minor leagues, but then got called up and didn't really do anything. Like, these are legit guys that could be a part of the team going forward and are expected to be part of the team going forward. So,
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. So speaking of all these legit guys, we talk about all these top prospects a lot. Today, we're going to go a little more deep cut. We're going to get into breakout candidates at every position throughout the organization, mostly lower level guys, right? Guys that are not necessarily established, rarely the top prospect guys. But Dylan and I both put together a list of our breakout candidate at each different infield position, just a little less in the outfield, some pitchers, some relief pitchers, starters, and relievers. We're just going to go through all these guys we think are going to break out. But before we get into the breakouts, let's talk a little bit about where we're at right now. Michael Taylor signed this week with the White Sox. Michael A. Taylor, a veteran outfielder, a lot of experience in center field, grades out as one of the best defensive outfielders in the past, 5-10 years in baseball. I did some research on him this offseason, and, he's been a guy that has graded out excellently defensively, some genuine, plus speed, right? Decent pop, has flashed it at times, not going to hit a ton. He's definitely going to have a lower batting average on base percentage for the most part, but great defense, some solid speed, a little bit of power in there. What did you make of the Michael Taylor signing? Because I think both of us probably had the same reaction when we first saw that deal go down earlier this week.
Yeah, I think we both were kind of like, that kind of alludes to a potential Luis Robert trade before the season starts. And while, yes, I think that is a possibility, and to be honest, I almost expect it at this point, I think that they're trying to lean more away from Andrew Benintendi in left field. I think that he's going to be getting a lot more DH work, and then your outfield is, Taylor, Robert in center, and then, or even like Talkman in center, and then Slater, probably Slater and Talkman in right, probably. That's probably the platoon. but there's 5 outfielders on the 40-man right now that I could conceive making the roster. So I think that either Robert goes or one of them is on the bench, which I don't know. They all sign major league deals, so I don't think
Yeah.
one of them would want to be on the bench. And then you got like Dominic Fletcher, Oscar Colas mixed in there, which Colas did say that, or they did say that he was moving or at least trying to move to first base, which I guess sure, but I don't know. There's a lot of mixing and matching that you can do in the outfield right now, and that's just going to be another one of the battles that we're going to see in spring training, along with the young
Yeah.
guys like Colson, Caro. So it'll be fun. Like there's actually going to be battles for playing time happening in spring training.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was already going to be a lot of battles on the infield side and then the catching side, especially as we know, of course.
Hmm.
But at the same time, the outfield, I think it was like as of last week, it was like, oh, okay, you've got Slater and Tauchman switching off and right, you've got Luis in center, you've got Benny in left. That's kind of your outfield mix, right? Now you've got a situation where I don't think right like Deloach, Colas, like those guys weren't even in Dominic Fletcher, like they weren't going to be in a legit position for major league innings.
Right.
But Michael Taylor now, a 1 year, a little under $2 million deal, right? Like, yeah, you're not spending a ton of money on him, but it's a big league contract. He has a lot of experience. He's elite defensively, right? So it gives you the option. If you keep Luis, like you said, you can rotate in Benny a little more. He can be a little bit more DH for a pretty. I think defensively an outfield of Slater, Tauchman, and Taylor would actually be Wheeler,
Yeah.
Robert, especially if you factor in Taylor, Robert, and Tauchman or Slater, right? Like that's a really good defensive outfield actually if you have
Yep.
Taylor and Robert out there. But it also gives you the roster flexibility for the Reds to come along or the Phillies to come along and say, hey, we're ready to pony up. We want Luis Robert for this season. I think it's almost like the Dylan Cease situation last year, right? Where you
Hmm.
don't need to force a trade, but if someone wants to make a move happen and they're offering something that the White Sox think is, reasonable value for Luis Robert, you got to consider it. And you have the backup now where you have a stopgap in center field in Michael Taylor if you want to make that type of move.
Yeah, and also like let's say that they hold on to Robert until trade
Yeah.
deadline, whenever. He's probably going to get injured. Like he's played one full season in the
Yeah.
MLB. Like the inevitable hamstring tweak, hip tweak, whatever, it's going to happen. And if you can have somebody better than Zach Deloach, Dominic Fletcher to throw out there, I would prefer that. But I think that a trade is, I would say, along the similar timeline to Dylan Cease last year. I think you were pretty right on that.
Yeah, so I could see it going either way. And then you've got positional battles, right? Like that's something we're going to have to talk about in spring training. And I'm going to be out in Arizona in a few weeks. I can't wait to kind of talk to the guys. The pitching side, right? On the other side of it is like there's a lot of guys. Kai Bush going on, the 60-day having Tommy John. That's another piece of news from this week. That's a big bummer.
Yep.
A guy that we were hoping to be in the mix for whether it was a starting spot or even shifting into a bullpen role, right? He was at least going to be getting big league innings at some point this year. So it would have been, nice to see what would happen there. But at the same time, there's still a lot of guys that are competing for innings. There's still a
Yep.
lot of spots open. The rotation is far from settled. An interesting little thing from Scott Merkin today. I don't know if you saw that
Oh
today,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
Mark said that Jairo Iriarte is the locker room spot. And, don't read into this too much for anybody,
Right.
people listening, right? Like that doesn't mean a ton. With that said, last year when I was in Arizona, there was 3 or 4 guys that were kind of competing for spots that I don't want to name directly that had lockers next to each other. And all 3 of those guys ended up being guys that made the major league roster. So, not putting too much stock into it, but Jairo Iriarte was next to, what was it? Martin Perez, Davis Martin,
Thorpe.
Jonathan Cannon, and Drew Thorpe in the locker room. And those are the 4 guys that I think are the 4 top favorites, assuming Thorpe is fully healthy, to be in the rotation, right? Sean Burke is the guy that I think we have talked about as that 5th spot being the most likely. But Iriarte, like even him being in the bigs last year as a reliever for a few weeks does not mean he's not a starter. They very much want Iriarte to be a starter. It's just a matter of, getting him some starts in AAA potentially versus them saying, hey, he's had a great offseason. Let's get him in the bigs. So it'll be interesting to follow all those positional battles throughout the next, month, right?
Yeah, I think that the starting rotation and even just bullpen and like pitching in general, like there's so many spots that are up for grabs right now that you can go so many different ways with it, and I would still be pretty intrigued by it. So if Iriarte does end up making the opening day rotation, like, sure, fine. Like he wasn't like great last year, but I think that we've seen enough from him, especially in like his limited stint in the big leagues, where he was like, okay, this guy can hang with some of these big league hitters. And if they think that he's ready, I know Chris Getz thinks very highly of him. He called him like Edwin Diaz with like a starter's workload last spring training, like when the Cease trade went down. if he thinks that he's ready, fine. I would much rather him get rotation spots over like a Bryce
Yep.
Wilson, Tyler Gilbert, maybe. Like, yeah, 100%.
I'm with you there. So I think it's gonna be exciting to follow. We're pumped to see it. For now, before spring training really gets going, let's look at some of these deep cut guys. These are people that some of these guys you're gonna have heard of for our listeners that know the farm system. We talk about some of these guys, but there's also some names, at least on my list, that I'm not sure many people are familiar with, honestly. And I think that it's going to be really fun to see how these are a stretch in some cases, right? These are guys that are more in the organizational depth chart more than the high prospect status, but that doesn't mean there isn't things that we like about them and things that we're looking forward to seeing what they can do this coming season. So we'll start with catching. We'll go through the offensive side, and then we'll work into pitching after with starters and relievers. Both of us put together our list. We had a few things that overlap, so I adjusted some of them to make sure we each had somebody at every position. We'll start at the catching spot, Dylan. Who is your breakout catcher pick for this season?
I went Jackson Appel. I believe he was the 6th rounder out of Texas A&M this past draft cycle, and I think it was either last episode or the one right before it. Jeff was talking about how he saw him in high A and like he loved him, and I totally get it because you look at the numbers that he put up in college; they were really, really good. I was looking at like his draft card earlier today. The only stat that he wasn't in the 80th percentile or above in was simply zone swing percentage. Like every single thing else, he was above 80th percentile, and he impacts the ball hard. He doesn't chase a lot, and he calls a pretty good game. He's a pretty good defender on the catching side. So I think that if he can sort of stand out in high A, maybe get a bump to double A, I think that there's a lot of catchers in the organization. Appel could quickly rise to the third best catcher in the organization behind Caro and Teal.
Yeah, I think it's a similar profile, not different type of player, but similar kind of outlook as when Michael Turner was drafted 2 years ago, right? You've got a guy who is experienced at the very highest level of college ball, right? He's played it in intense college situations. He has a lot of experience. He's strong defensively. He's a guy that at the, with catching depth in the system, right? Like the worst case scenario is he's a really good catcher to work with your young arms. Like that is already a good case scenario, right? Like he doesn't even have to be a legit prospect for him to provide value to the organization. I think that's why he became a very easy underslot target in the draft, because you had to spend a lot of money early to get some of your top guys that you really wanted in this draft. But that's a guy who you're okay getting him as an underslot because there's value there regardless of how he develops as a hitter, regardless of how he develops as a player, right? But that doesn't mean he can't develop further. So I really like that pick from you. I think that's the guy who, is the candidate to be the quickest riser among catchers in the system.
100%.
Sure. I went a different direction. I went with a guy who was splitting time at the end of the season with Appel in single A, and Rony Hernandez. Totally different side of the spectrum. Appel is the experienced college guy, high level defense, going to be a guy that should rise quickly. Rony Hernandez just turned 20 this offseason and is coming off of an entire season in single A, right? He already has played a full season in Kannapolis and is going to be 20 this entire season in 2025. It's just a matter of, can he find impact? Rony Hernandez has a good arm. He's starting to get there at the plate. He definitely still has work to be done. But again, this is a big-bodied 20-year-old guy who's coming off of his 19-year-old season already playing in single A and having to catch guys who were, we saw some of the arms that went through Kannapolis last year, right? He was tasked with catching some elite pitching prospects at 19 years old while still kind of figuring things out. No wonder the power didn't really come on the offensive side, right? Like I don't blame him for that. And I think that we see stuff, and we've seen it in his swing, the ability to tap into more power. Last year, only 1 home run, right? With that said, 62 walks to 59 strikeouts last season, an on-base percentage just below 400 last year for Rony. If he can find some of that power, and he has strength, he clearly has natural strength, and that's very apparent from watching him play last season. If he can tap into some power and start to launch a little bit more, the swing generally was a little bit ground ball heavy last season. If he can really tap into a launch angle a little bit more, this is a guy who I think could be the 3rd highest upside catcher in the system, even if Appel is probably that 3rd best guy. Rony's going to take some time, but I think he's going to get to be the starting catcher in Candy to start the year, as opposed to just kind of half and half last season, and could even be in Winston this year at just 20 years old if things go well to start the season. It's all going to come down to if he can kind of find a little more impact with the bat.
Yeah, and you look at just his body in general. Like, he is a big dude. Like, I think he's like 6'3", like
he's
over
6'2", 200. And I think he might be a little bigger than that, honestly, from seeing him in person. But
yeah, no, he's a big dude. So if he can just elevate the ball a little bit more, like you were saying, I think that he's going to tap into more of that gap to gap and even over the fence power.
Yeah.
and just getting more comfortable with minor league pitching. I mean, going from rookie ball to low A, it's a jump, obviously, and he handled it well. More walks and strikeouts, and I think that if everything goes well, I don't see a reason why he can't end up as one of the top 15 in the system come end of the year. I think that's a decently. I think it's lofty, but I think he can do it.
I think there's a world, yeah, and I think it's a nice left-handed swing, right? A left-handed hitting catcher, and someone who, again, there's a lot of work to be done there. But at 20 years old, I like Roney to kind of take a step forward this year and show some of the offensive impact that could make him, a solid catching prospect.
Yeah, 100%.
Moving over to first base. First base is a tough position because I think right now in the system, there's a lot of guys who can play first, right? Like they're not necessarily first base legit prospects, but they're guys that don't necessarily have a position and are going to be playing first because they don't really play anywhere else consistently. So a lot of these guys you could put here also play third or also play right field or something like that, right? But I think it's an interesting position to follow because it's one position where I don't really think there's a future guy for the White Sox, right? Like I think a lot of positions you look and you say, oh, that guy or that guy is the future of that position. First base is kind of a toss-up, man. I mean, you've got Andrew Vaughn there still. Tim Elko's going to get big league innings at some point this year. There's not a first base prospect in this system that you look at and say, oh, that's going to be a future big league piece, right? There's a lot of question marks. Who did you go with at first base for your breakout guy?
I went with a guy who, like you were saying, is not 100% a first baseman. He plays first, but he's seen some time in corner outfield spots. I went with Ryan Galaney. He was the 13th rounder out of Wofford in 2023, and the first year that he was in the system, like his draft year, he was great. He tore it up in low A, and then the first couple months of this year, he was really good. Earned a promotion to Winston, and then sort of scuffled a bit. Didn't have the greatest season in high A, but he's a professional hitter, man. You look at his swing; it's violent. He hits the ball so gosh darn hard. And
that's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, he hits the ball hard, and there is a bit of a whiff issue with Galaney, but I just think that if he can cut it down just a bit, I think that you're allowed to whiff a little bit more at first base when you have the type of power that Galaney has. I think that he'll sort of be I mean, we didn't even rank Tim Elko on our top 30. But I think that he can sort of jump into that Tim Elko tier where, you're whiffing a lot and hitting a bunch of homers. So I think that he can be a bit more than Elko, if I'm being honest, just because he has like a pretty decent amount more speed than Elko too. So I like Galaney. I don't think that there's really like a clear breakout candidate at first base like we were talking, but I think that Galaney is a decently good pick. Who did you go with? Because I think that there's a few guys that I could see, but I think I know who you're going with.
I don't know if you do. Maybe you do.
Really?
But I don't know how to say this name, and I still don't know how to say this name. But I went with Alec Makarevitz. Is that right? I think that's how you say it. Okay, you did. You had me pinpointed. But I went with Alec because the interesting thing for me last year is when you see a draft class come in and they go through big league camp, right? I talked to a lot of these guys when I was out in Kannapolis last season in August, right? And you see them kind of stagger sending guys from Arizona into Kannapolis and then eventually Winston this year, right? A lot of these guys are going to reach Winston. Makarevitz is the guy who was the only undrafted guy to join the first crop of guys to go to Kannapolis. Yeah. There's something to be said there. And I don't want to make that like the only point here because I think he's a talented player. But I think it's very clear that the White Sox, given his level of college experience, 5 years of college, an older guy, he's going to be 24 years old throughout this entire season, right? Switch hitter, can play some third, can play some first. There's something there that the White Sox like. They signed him as an undrafted free agent basically right after the draft. He was one of the first guys to sign. He was the first guy to debut in Kannapolis. And he was getting more innings in Kannapolis than some of the guys that were drafted by the White Sox. That's something to watch out for. And I think there was a lot of signs of a guy who could be a really good hitter, right? His first 28 games in Kannapolis, 34 hits across those 28 games, 10 doubles, 2 home runs, 28 RBIs in 28 games total for Makarevitz, 11 walks. The strikeout number is a little high, right? 28 strikeouts across 28 games is you want a little less than, a strikeout a game for sure. But for a corners guy who has flashed some power, has gap-to-gap strength, really experienced switch hitter, I think we're going to see him in Winston this year. I think because of his age, he's going to get pushed a little bit. I think he might start in Winston even. And I think we're going to see him have a chance to grow with some of those draft class guys simultaneously, even though he was an undrafted, fifth-year senior guy.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head with, he was the first guy to sign after the draft. I think
Yeah.
it was probably only like a day or
I
so
think it
after
was
the
literally, it
draft.
might have even been the day the draft ended.
Yeah,
I'm
it
not gonna
was
lie.
something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that. So they obviously had their eye on him. And, let's say they did end up taking him in like the 16th through 20th rounds. I
Right.
think that he would have been one of the top, or he would have been in the first crop to go up to Canny anyways.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I do like him. I think that he's a guy where, like you were saying, the strikeouts are a bit up in the air, but
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that he's a professional hitter, a lot of college experience, and in
Yeah.
the lower levels of the minors, that'll carry you.
And we're talking about a position that there's not a clear prospect
Yeah,
at. There's not any, legit prospects that are being circled at this position right now. So these are some deep cut guys, but I think either Galaney or Makarevitz could be, a guy that takes a step forward and really flashes a legit corner bat with some power this season that we like to see moving forward. Into the infield, we had some crossover here for sure. I think the middle infield is where I think we both have a few guys that we've had circled, and there's
hmm
also some guys that are fairly obvious. Second base, I went with Gerald Perez. I think this is a guy who it's hard to say he's a breakout because he was the headline prospect of a trade last year, right? So it's like, what does that mean in terms of like him breaking out? But I think there's another gear here for Perez. I think we could really see him tick up in a way that makes us more and more excited that he was, a piece that the White Sox went out and acquired, right? 20 years old, just turned 20 this offseason. So going to be 20 the entire season, already has, 105 games, actually more than that, I think, because I think he got a few innings in single A in 2013 with the Dodgers. So he's got
yeah,
112 games total of single A experience. At 20 years old, this guy could be in Winston to start the year. Maybe he's in Canny for a little bit, but he's definitely in Winston sooner than later, you have to think, this season, considering, yeah, he's young, but 112 games of single A experience with a good amount of success is a good indicator, right? So he's going to be in Winston sooner than later. Had an 800 OPS last season, was consistently, getting on base at a good rate. He walks pretty well. The strikeout numbers are a little high still. The power didn't quite shine with the White Sox, right? After the trade, he did have 10 doubles and two triples, right? So 12, double triples in 30 games, but only 2 home runs. Did have 10 home runs earlier in the season, though, with the Dodgers organization. I think we're going to see a minor league Jose Altuve archetype of a player, right? I'm not comparing him to Jose Altuve, nowhere near that level, of course. But he's a small guy who has more power than you'd expect, really does a good job pulling to his pull side, right? He's really good at elevating pull side. I think we could see a 20 homer season from Perez, and that might be a little bold of me, but 12 home runs last year in a season where he was still really finding his groove in minor league baseball after hitting 11 the year before between the complex league and single A. I think we could see a 15 to 20 homer season from Perez and start to look at him as a, top 15 guy in the system. Right now, I think he's not far off that right now. He probably is around the 15 range. I think there's a world where when a lot of these guys debut, we look at Gerald Perez as one of the best hitting prospects in the system at the end of next year.
yeah, 100%. He's similar to my pick, where smaller second baseman with a ton of pop, a ton of speed, and those two things are intriguing enough to be one of the guys that we pick for these, because power speed combos, that's the way baseball's going. You got your Ellie De La Cruzes of the world, and Perez will never be like that sort of like caliber of player. At least he could be. We
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, you never know.
It would be awesome, but I don't think that he's not going to be like a hitting 485-foot tape measure nukes every night.
Right.
But for a guy that's what, like 5'8", 5'9", on a good day,
Yeah,
like he's got more power than you would expect
for
from
sure.
that frame.
Yeah.
And it's similar to my pick. And my pick is, if you know me and if you've watched other episodes of this, if you follow me on Twitter, you know who my pick is going to be. It's Javier Mogollon. He is essentially just a younger version of Gerald Perez. He's got big time power, big time speed, and also has a big time whiff issue. So
Yeah.
if he can cut down the Ks, which he did at the end of the Arizona Complex League season, I think that he could be a guy where he will put his name on some maps, because he's got a ton of speed. He was the only ACL player last year to steal 15 or more bases and not get caught a single time. He's a good runner, and he's like Perez. He elevates the ball well to the pull side and can take extra bases, even if it's not a homer. Like if he gets one in the gap, there's a chance that he's on 3. So I think that Mogollon will probably be in Canny to start the year. Maybe Arizona. I would be shocked if he is, just
Yeah.
because he's
Do you
already.
think he opens? You think he opens in Canny?
I think he does, just
I think it
because I think.
depends on Perez almost, as weird as
Yeah,
that,
that's
as funny as
yeah,
that is, right? I think if Perez gets the bump to Winston after 100 plus games in single A and they think he's ready, then I think Mogollon has a clear path to Kenny, right?
yeah, 100%. Because he's repeated Arizona twice. Like last year was his second year in Arizona, or was
Right.
that? I think he was in the Dominican the year before. So maybe he
Right.
it,
But
he was he's
2 years of complex, yeah.
exactly. But I think that he's a guy where if he can produce against some of the better pitching in the lower levels of the minors, I think that he could be a guy that we look at in maybe July, August, where we're looking at him as a top 20 prospect in the system, just because of how much he impacts the ball and how much of the power speed threat that he is.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's going to be fun to watch both those guys. I think they're both, similar but different archetypes and kind of one step apart from each other. And
Right.
Mogollon's someone that, yeah, there's a lot of whiff concerns there. I think, when you're in the complex league and you're striking out as much as he is, it's a little bit concerning. But there's also some really loud tools there that we're going to definitely keep an eye on at the least moving forward.
100%.
Going over to shortstop, I'm gonna start with these two because I don't think we need to discuss the guys. I had a
Yeah.
combo one because we both had the same guy initially here that we'll talk about in a
Mhm.
second. I put two guys that I think are the only two guys, in my opinion, that could be the shortstop for Chicago, other than Colson Montgomery, in the
Yep.
mid to long term future, right? Like that's
3
the
to
way I
5
view these
years.
guys, right? So my two guys were Caleb Bonnemer and Sam Antonacci, both the shortstops drafted in this past draft. Bonnemer being the second round pick out of high school, Sam Antonacci being a fifth round pick out of Coastal Carolina. These are the two guys that you can see being the next shortstop prospects, right? They are the prospects. They're both Bonnemer's consensus top 12 in the system, I would say. Antonacci is a funny one. We'll talk about this in the future. We're working on our FutureSox top 30 among the staff right now. Dylan and I are way higher on Sam Antonacci than the rest of our staff is,
Yep.
which is where, you'll see it in our ranking, right? I have Sam Antonacci as a borderline top 20 prospect in the system because I think what he brings to the table and what he showed last season is so incredibly impressive compared to a lot of guys that are coming out of the draft class, right? His contact and his approach is better than everyone in the draft class, and it's not even particularly close, I think, right now. Yeah, the impact is questionable, but a shortstop who can play all over the infield and already has shown very clear elite contact skills, he's going to be in Winston to start the year. I think Bonnemer will probably start in Arizona still just because he's so young, but is a guy that we could see having a very similar George Wolkow season from last year where he starts in Arizona. If he does well, he's in Canny sooner than later because he's that talented. So both these guys, we don't need to talk about much. I don't think they quite qualify as a breakout because they were just both top 5 round draft picks last year.
Right.
Do I think they're both going to have awesome seasons? Yeah. And am I really
100%.
excited to watch both these guys? Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I think that Antonacci is just like so head and shoulders the best, like you were saying, the best approach and contact skills out of anybody in the draft class. That like he shouldn't really qualify as a breakout. And in I think it was like 25 games in single A last year, he had a 900 OPS, walked more than he struck out, swiped a couple bases, more than a couple. I think he had like 7 of. I think he was like 7 for 9. But he just puts up such a great at bat, and I think that like looking back this time next year, I think we could be seeing like a similar Brooks Baldwin-esque rise to the top of the farm.
That's exactly what I've been thinking. But who is the guy that we both went with originally? Because there's really only one guy that I think could break out compared to these guys who are already kind of high-end prospects to a degree in this system.
Yeah, so we both went with Ryan Burroughs. And it's interesting because I think that Burroughs had a good year last year, so that's why I originally wasn't like gonna pick him as my breakout because like it's not really a true breakout, but I think it just progressing.
I think it qualifies. He didn't do what we thought he might last year.
That's fair.
I mean, 568 OPS is definitely not what we were hoping from Burroughs last year.
Maybe I was just looking at the second. I know his second half was pretty good.
He had a much better second half, yes, for sure.
Yeah, after he added like after he changed his stance and tweaked something with it. And he was looking a lot better down the stretch. But I think Burroughs is just like that athletic middle infielder that knows the game and plays really hard. You know, he's a fast guy. He doesn't have much over the fence power, but when he gets it in the gaps, it's going to the wall, and he can run pretty well. Like he can take extra bases, turn a single into a double into a triple, etc. But he's a pretty good like defender on the dirt, I think that he's probably going to stick at shortstop. Like he doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be putting on enough or putting on weight to where like he's in the Colson Montgomery uh, stratosphere of like, okay, is he going to get bumped to third? Like, no,
Right.
he's athletic enough to be like, okay, this guy's a shortstop going forward.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think he's a shortstop. I think he's slick at shortstop, right? I think he still makes a few mistakes here and there that I saw when I was in Kannapolis, but I think the arm is strong enough, and I think the
Yeah.
instincts are good enough to stick it short. And I think, like we talked about the other two guys that I just mentioned, right? I think Antonacci is very clearly in Winston, right, to start the season. I think he's the shortstop in Winston, and I think with Bonnemer being still in, in Arizona to start the season, you've probably got the starting shortstop job still being Burrows in Kannapolis
Right.
once again, and then hoping he can make his way up. The biggest thing you mentioned there is the swing change, right? He adjusted the way his hands start, and he adjusted his entire kind of pre-swing movement last year that really helped him start to show a little more promise in the box. He's also just a gamer. Like this is a guy that is super competitive. Definitely just wants to win. He, had 1 home run all regular season and only 7 doubles, and then in the playoffs had 3 doubles and a homer in just 5 games. Right.
Yeah.
So he had really nice few big moments for Canny in the playoffs, and I think there's just a lot more to find there offensively. Like I said, a 2. Last year in Kannapolis, right, a 204 batting average, 292 on base percentage. Like, there's a lot more there. I'm not saying he's going to be an elite hitter, but I think being a plus defender at short and finding something else with his new swing, I could see Burrows becoming, back into a top 30 type guy that he was before last season.
Yeah, 100%. I think that like outside of those 3, there's really not a shortstop that you can say could break out. So I think that Burrows just kind of like had to be the pick just because of how highly touted Antonacci and Bonnemer were.
Right.
So third base, I feel like there's a little bit more options. Maybe not.
Third's interesting too because I think there's a lot of guys that play third but aren't necessarily locked as a third baseman. So who did you go with at third?
At third base, I went with somebody who we haven't even seen play in the White Sox organization yet, Alexander Albertus. He was in that same trade that brought Gerald Perez over from the Dodgers. He actually underwent like a pretty heavy knee leg surgery early on in the offseason. It looked scary, to be honest. Like he was on crutches, like he had like relearn how to walk. I don't know. Like it looked bad, but I think that if he can get back to like fully healthy, I think that he's a guy where, you saw what he could do in rookie ball. And I think that he was probably more highly touted than Perez coming over just because of the impact in his bat. And I don't want to say he's going to get bumped to third just because of how big he is, because he is a shortstop right now. Like he played short for the Dodgers in their rookie league, but he's a guy where if he's healthy, I think that he could put his name on the map for people who aren't really familiar with him just because they haven't had a chance to see him play, which none of us have. So I think that if he's healthy, I think that's the big thing for me is if he's healthy, I think that he's going to have a pretty good year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. I haven't seen much of him, right? Like I watched some tape from him when the trade happened and then the Fetty trade, right? But like I just want to see him play. So I'm excited to see at the very least what he has in the tank, where he starts the season. If it's, in Arizona for a little bit or if he just goes straight to Kannapolis, I think it's going to be, another fun name to at least just see what's there going into the season.
Yeah, just like you're saying, another young name that could rise up the ranks, like has all the tools to be a guy in the system. So
yeah, totally. This is a really deep cut. This is one that I think most people probably are not quite familiar with. I went with Adrian Gill. Adrian Gill is a guy who Hill, I think, is it Heel like
Heel.
Like Yankees?
Yeah.
I think it is Heel.
Yeah.
As well. But Adrian Heel, 19-year-old in the Arizona Complex League. I can't say I've watched a lot of him. I've watched a few things here and there. I like the look of the swing. I think the swing looks like it has more and more power that he could keep finding there. I think he's a strong, bodied guy. He's played second. He's played a little first. He's played a little third. Don't know where he's going to end up defensively. But last season, good, decent plate approach. He strikes out a little bit, but 37 walks across 56 games in the ACL last year. Flashed some power, flashed some speed, 10 stolen bases as well last year. I just think there's something to keep an eye on there. I am not going to say that I know a ton about him. 19 years old, Venezuelan international signing, right? But I think he was one of the, more intriguing hitters in the Arizona Complex League last year. And I think this year we could probably see him start there and eventually get to Kannapolis. And at the very least, it's someone that I want to watch play in Kannapolis because he's got some speed. It looks like he's got some power. I think he has a little more power that he can grow into. And that's the thing that makes it a fascinating watch for me.
Yeah, like you were saying, I'm not going to pretend like I have a
Yeah,
fully in-depth scouting report on him just because we haven't seen him play. Like having these guys in Canny where they're like actually televised, we can watch them. That's
right.
big. So like I don't necessarily know as much about him as some of the other guys like Burrows, who like yeah, Hill could be probably better than Burrows, but we just don't know. But he was probably I think he was the best hitter in terms of WRC plus in that Arizona lineup. I could be wrong. I
He was one. He's
was
definitely up there. Yeah,
yeah, he was pretty good. But yeah, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what I'm talking about. Like I'm not going
yeah.
to give some fake scouting report on him, but I do think that he is a name to watch because it's just another rookie ball standout who could end up being something. We don't
Yeah.
really know.
Someone will keep an eye on for sure. That's
Exactly.
why I went with him because I don't really think there's too many people that stand out to me at third base. So I wanted to go with someone who
Yeah.
was a deeper cut and someone just keep an eye on as they make their way over to affiliated ball this season. Hopefully, going to the outfield, we went with we did one outfielder each. Outfield positions are really hard to gauge in the minors, and I
Yeah.
think it's also an area of the farm system where it's frankly there is a few big guys and there's not a ton of depth. There's a lot of guys that are college draft picks, and we'll see what happens. I went with someone who's like he's definitely known. He's been around the system for a while. I think there's another gear. Could this be the year of DJ Gladney? That's where I'm at. I think we've wanted him to break out fully and really take that next step forward for a couple of years now. I think this is a guy that has a ton of raw power, a lot to like there with his swing. He's athletic. He's a big dude, but it just hasn't quite come together at the plate. Last year, though, he had a decent season in Winston, got promoted a little bit unexpectedly, I think. I think it was more just because he'd been in Winston for so long and he hadn't
Hmm.
really taken a step forward. Gets to Birmingham, though, at the end of the season and looked really good down the stretch and into the playoffs for Birmingham. In 24 games with Birmingham, he posted an 819 OPS, 6 home runs, four doubles across that time. The strikeouts are high, but it was a little bit better once he got to Birmingham, actually. 23 across 24 games, opposed to in Winston, where it was 87 strikeouts across 67 games. So reduce the strikeout rate a little bit, getting on base a little more, continuing to flash that power, right? 16 home runs last year on the season. He's hit at least 16 home runs now the past 3 seasons. Breakout, what does that mean, right? Like I think we've seen a similar year from Gladney for 3 straight seasons now. I think there's a gear there. I think there's a world in which he gets to Birmingham this year and he's comfortable there and he got to settle in last year and he just starts mashing for power because his power is there. I can see him taking another step forward, but it's definitely going to have to come with a reduction of the strikeouts and a little bit more disciplined approach at the plate.
Yeah, 100%. I think that he's a guy where if he can, like you were saying, cut down the whiff rate, he's a guy to watch because he was in the AFL and he hit a ball like 119 miles an hour. Like I did not know that he had that in him. I think it was the first game that he played in that was Statcast tracked, and 119. You don't see that getting hit by a lot of minor leaguers. And sure, it's in the Arizona Fall League, but I think that if he found something at the end of last year and can ride it over into this year, there's a very real world where he's one of the premier outfield prospects in this system. I know that that's not saying a lot, but
Right.
he could be a guy that ends up in probably right field, I would assume, just because of the arm that he has. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that if Gladney can roll with that success that he had at the end of the year, he could be a guy to
Yeah.
watch for sure.
Yeah. That's what I got. Who do you got in the outfield?
In the outfield, I have another 2024 draft pick, Casey Sauke.
Mm.
He was a guy who I think he was a third round pick last year or fourth. Yeah, he was a
Fourth.
fourth round
Yeah.
pick.
Overslot,
Went
though, in the fourth.
yeah, went straight to Winston. Was actually pretty good. He had a 110 WRC plus, batted 290, only slugged 398, which was a bit interesting just because of how high his power numbers were in college.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's intriguing to me is he's got a ton of pop in the bat. He has like a very violent uppercut swing. He's great at elevating the ball, and he does have a whiff issue. There's no way around it. So if he can, I feel like I'm playing a broken record here. Just
Yeah.
cut down the
A little
whiffs and just continue to have that same impact on the ball. He's a guy where, drafted in the top 5 rounds for a reason. I mean, the organization clearly likes him. I think we paid him over $1 million. I could be wrong, but he's a guy where, if he ends up being that stereotypical right fielder, that's fine by me because White Sox haven't had a right fielder in quite some time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm with you on that. I think that's a solid pick. I think both him and Nick McLean are going to be kind of that similar tier of college
Yeah.
guys, a lot of experience. We're going to see what happens. You got to see it at Winston or higher, right? Like I think there's not a ton to see with any of those guys, including Antonacci as well. Like there's not much to see with those guys in Canny at this point. I think with the guys that are super high level college experience, like Asauki, who played at the ACC, and McLean, who played in the Pac-12, and like let's see it in Winston. Let's get a bunch of those 2024 college guys to Winston, and let's just see what happens there, because I think that could create a pretty fun atmosphere and a team in Winston that could grow together this season.
100%. So that I
Pitching.
believe that wraps up. Yeah, that wraps up
That
position
leaves us
players.
that heads us into the pitching side of things. We started. I think we're starting with 3 starters, 2 relievers. I have an extra reliever thrown in there because I just wanted to mention him. But starting with the starters, there are so many arms in the system, so many arms we already talk about. Let's talk about some of the guys that we don't necessarily have in the top 30 or even necessarily near the top 30, maybe.
For my first pitcher, I went with a guy I was pretty high on when he got drafted in 2023. I went with Jake Peppers. He was a guy that I was pretty intrigued by just because of his stuff. He's got a pretty hard fastball. He can run it up to the upper 90s, like 98, 99, but he'll sit in like the mid 90s, like 95, 97. But it's a good pitch mix on a starter's frame, and he's sort of like a funky low 3/4 guy where he can get a lot of weak contact and a lot of swing and misses. And he was pretty good down the stretch in Canny. He started a lot of games but didn't go very deep into them. So if he can get stretched out more into that building up into the 5-6 inning guy, I think that he could be somebody that we look at as just yet another arm in the system that has to fight their way up through the system, even though they are deserving of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good example of someone who spent the whole year in Canny, but like was good. It wasn't that he was bad. There was some ups and downs for sure, but he was generally good. And I think it's just trying to find innings for him. Peppers is a guy that he's going to be a starter this year, and I think he'll find a way to get himself into the rotation in Winston this season. But I think he's also someone that I have in my kind of bank of the starters in the system that like could be a really good reliever.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think he's the type of guy with his arsenal and the way he pitches that could be an electric relief arm if he were to transition there eventually. You let him start for now, for sure. If you can find a room for him, he should be in the rotation in Winston this year. But I could very easily see a 2026 or 2027 Jake Peppers being a really, really good reliever.
100%. Who did you go with?
Another guy that I think exactly fits into the category of what I just mentioned, someone who was a reliever at one point and has transitioned to a starter last year, but is still kind of, figuring out what it means to be a starter. I went with Seth Keener, 3rd round pick from that 2023 class. This is a guy who was one of the best relievers in the country at Wake Forest, was kind of a swingman, versatile kind of utility type of guy when he was in college. And last year transitioned into being a starter in Kannapolis. Ended up getting hurt, came back off the injury list and went straight to Winston in an interesting move that was kind of a nice way to give him a bump, but at the same time, it really didn't. It was kind of a negated 2 games that he threw in Winston at the end of the season just to get a few more innings under his belt. But really, 14 starts to start his professional career in Kannapolis, 3.36 ERA, 75 strikeouts across those 64 innings. The walks were a little high with 32 walks, but that's still nothing crazy. The stuff is really good. Keener's got one of the better sliders among that draft class and generally in the system right now. Very consistent, a plus, definitely a plus slider. I wouldn't go as far as plus, but definitely a plus slider with a lot of move. It gets a lot of chases outside the zone. Balances out with the fastball that has a good amount of movement. I think he needs to kind of still maximize his fastball a little more. Mixes in a changeup as well. But this is a guy that didn't need more than a fastball and a slider when he was a reliever in college at Wake Forest. Right, still trying to figure that out. I think he has the ability to become a starter, but I'm very curious to see what happens this year. I mean, he only threw under 70 innings last year, right? So this season is going to be all about building up the innings for him and figuring out what the added pitches to his arsenal. This is a guy who I can't wait to hear in spring training what he's throwing right now, because Keener is a super big student of the game. You can find an interview I did with him when he was drafted back in in late at the end, I think after the 2023 season. Me and him had talked a while on the FutureSox pod, and he's like, he loves chess. He's super into the mental side of things. He's a really, really interesting guy, and also is someone who I think cares about his craft and is always thinking, when he's not on the mound, right, he's always thinking about ways he can be better and things to do differently. Might be a reliever long-term, still an arm that I'm really excited to watch this season, though.
Yeah, 100%. And being a student of the game and like trying to become the best version of themselves. That's like something that we have to like look for nowadays. Like not a lot of guys are truly dedicated like that. And if Keener does end up being a reliever, I'm sure he's gonna dive into the deep cuts of that too, like what makes a good reliever. But like you were saying, if he can just continue to just get more innings under his belt and continue to learn what it means to be a starter, because he doesn't have much starting experience. He was like a spot starter
Right.
in college, but I think that he could be, I said for Peppers, just another one of the arms that has to fight their way up through the system.
Yep. No, I think you're spot on there. Who was your second starter you went with?
For my second starter, I went with a guy who we liked originally when the draft pick came out this past summer. I went with Mason Moore out of Kentucky. He was a guy who sort of fell off draft boards or fell down draft
Yeah.
boards this past spring. He had a really good 2023 college season and was like a projected like top 5 round pick, if not higher. But then
Yeah.
fell all the way down to I believe it was the 15th round. Yeah, 15th round, the 439th overall pick. White Sox snagged him for $150,000. And he's a guy where if he can just regain some of that college pedigree that he had in 2023, I think he's, I don't want to say similar to a Mason Adams, because Mason Adams was like a hidden gem that the White Sox found. But
Right.
his pitch mix is very similar. He's got sinker, changeup, curveball, slider. And I think that he commands the ball well enough that he can sort of be a Mason Adams light. And I hate using like he's got the same name, so it's comparable. But no, like he's genuinely like a pretty fair comparison to Mason Adams. Only threw 2 1/3 innings last year in Canny. Didn't go very well. He's got a 19.3 career minor league ERA right now. But it was 2 innings at the end of the year. I think that if he can just continue to develop and maybe get a little bit more swing and miss in his game, I think that he's yet another good starter in the White Sox system.
Yeah, I think that's definitely another guy to watch. It's there's a lot of arms. It's going to be interesting to see how the innings play out. But I think Moore is someone who got a taste in Candy last year, and I think he's going to need Kannapolis innings. I think probably this season and a substantive amount of them to really gauge what that arsenal looks like, figure out how to mix and match it to maximize his stuff. And is someone who another guy that is you want him to be a starter for sure, but there's always going to be more, there's so many guys to throw. I think we could see him in kind of a swingman role maybe eventually, or just kind of mix and matching, seeing what fits best for him. But another one to keep an eye on for sure. Another guy from recent draft class, this is going back to 2023. I'm not out on Christian Opper yet. I want to see what Christian Opper has. I hate, it's tricky because I wish I could see more complex stuff. It's hard because I don't have access, and we don't have access to a lot of many videos at all from the complex league. So it's hard to gauge with Opper what was going on last year. He made 12 starts in the complex league through 38 innings, had a 5.21 ERA, but complex league ERAs and stats are never really something that I'm putting too much stock into. 46 strikeouts across 38 innings. This is a guy who, we're excited to see. He was drafted out of high school, went to junior college for a year. He didn't end up signing with the A's, I believe, out of high school. Goes back to junior college for a season. It's a funky path, but there's stuff there. It's a fastball curveball changeup mix primarily. Someone that I think a tall highlighted. The fastball seems like could be a mid to upper 90s type of fastball. Very curious to see kind of just what everything looks like for him. I don't know. I haven't seen him pitch much. We don't have a lot of junior college videos out there. He wasn't at a big school. We haven't seen him yet. I just want to see Opper. I think he, hopefully is healthy going into the season. He had a few nice games in last season in Arizona in the complex league. Ups and downs, of course, but he had some starts where he was like, oh, there's some good numbers there coming up in Arizona. And I think he's someone that, is just going to be cool to see to get to pitch this season. And I think it sounds to me like he's the type of pitcher with the upside to really pop onto some radars this season.
Yeah, he was the best prep left-handed pitcher in Wisconsin in the 2022 draft cycle. I think the White Sox actually had a deal to sign him and then went to the A's,
Right.
obviously. But I think that he's just a stuffed up lefty that can, like, if he can find command, I think that he could be pretty good. That's been the biggest thing for him, is just not being able to throw strikes. And especially in Arizona, like you can you can tick down in velocity and just focus on throwing strikes just to
Right.
find the rhythm and all that. But I think that he probably opens in Arizona just because of how inexperienced he is and just
Yeah.
how much more development he needs. But like you were saying, he's a another guy where he could put his name on some draft or on some prospect boards because he's got the stuff to be a very good pitcher in today's game.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. We're getting a little long here, so I'm going to let you do your last starter, and then we'll cut into relievers from there after your starter.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this last one because it's similar to Christian Opper. I went with the second rounder, Blake Larson. I think that if he comes back from the surgery that he had, I think that he could be
Yeah.
just an absolute helium balloon because the stuff that he has is absolutely filthy. I don't want to compare him to Noah Schultz, but the breaking ball and fastball combo that he has, it's eerily reminiscent to what Schultz had in high school and like the year uh, year past it. But we haven't seen
Yeah.
him pitch. He had surgery, I believe it was earlier on this fall. So if he comes back from that healthy, I think that he's probably going to start in Arizona and just continue
Yeah.
to develop, get innings under his belt. But he's got a lot of upside. I kind of didn't like the pick just because like he's a second rounder. I don't want to call him a breakout, but he's got some serious.
He's also 18, so I mean, I think
Yeah,
you can call him a
exactly.
breakout.
Yeah,
And it's also a guy. I think we haven't seen him throw, so I think that's part of it. Is like he didn't pitch
exactly.
at all last year. This will be our first taste, hopefully, of really getting to see him throw. I'm hoping I can catch him throwing a little in Arizona this fall, or this spring in a few weeks here, just to see kind of what it looks like. It sounds to me from the high school tape and from the draft stuff we were talking about that it's a plus slider fastball combo,
Yeah.
and he's still trying to figure things out from there. The control's a little behind, but like I'll take my chances on a lanky 6'2" lefty with a high graded fastball and slider combination. That's what the White Sox have done an excellent job
Hmm.
developing recently. They're going for a mold and they're fitting it, and that's clear with
Yeah.
Hagen Smith. That's clear with Noah Schultz, right? Like Blake Larson is the high school next guy in that reign of lanky lefties that have a ton of fastball slider life on them.
Hmm.
I'm excited to watch him pitch for sure.
100%.
Going into relievers. Relievers are funky because you really
Yep.
never know. There's guys in this system that could become absolute stars in the bullpen that we have no idea of. There's guys that are starters, like we talked about, that could transition to the bullpen and break out, right? There's a lot of ways the relievers can go. The first one I went with is someone who, numbers wise, already broke out last year, but I just don't think that many people are familiar with him. Zach Franklin, another 2023 draft class guy, 10th round pick out of Missouri, and shout out Mizzou.
There we go.
Shout out your school. Zach Franklin last year had one of the best graded fastballs in all of minor league baseball.
Yep.
Then not only was he good in Winston, he gets to Birmingham at the end of the year, finishes the season in Birmingham with 10 innings of 4 hit, 1 run ball with 17 strikeouts and 3 walks. Zach Franklin was nasty last year, man. 75 strikeouts on the season, only 19 walks, a whip just above 1, held opponents' batting average to 190, a 121 batting average allowed in Birmingham once he got called up later in the season. Zach Franklin's unique, funky fastball is super cool to watch, and I think Zach Franklin might make his major league debut this year.
I don't think that is ridiculous to say at all. I think that I think I mentioned this on a previous episode that we did. His fastball had the highest swing and miss rate out of any fastball in the minor leagues. It was
Crazy.
like a ridiculous 47% whiff rate, something nuts like that. But it's a low launch fastball that just gets on you and it plays so well at the top of the zone. It's similar to one of my relievers, fastball, where low launch and can just get on you, even though it's not overpowering velocity, like it's mid 90s, but with the angle that it's coming in at and the induced vertical break that it gets, like it ticks up, or it seems like it ticks up in velo like 3-4 miles an hour.
Who'd you go with? Let's hear it.
It's a good segue into my first reliever. I went with Phil Fox. If you've listened to the show before, if you've listened to the draft special that we did, you know how much I love Phil Fox because he had the flattest fastball, or the lowest launch fastball out of the entire draft class, out of anybody who was drafted by any team. His fastball was getting on hitters the flattest. So it was essentially rising almost, or to batters, it looked like it was rising.
Yeah.
Similar to Franklin, it's not overpowering velocity. It's like 93 to 95 on good days, but he's got a slider to pair well off of it. And he's a guy that flat fastballs work in today's major and minor league. So if
Yeah.
he can just continue to get innings under his belt, develop, maybe get a changeup, splitter, whatever, but you can survive off a fastball slider mix, especially the fastball slider mix that Fox has. So I'm really excited to see him pitch this year because I think that he could be similar to Franklin's trajectory from last year.
Yeah, I could totally see it. I like that one. My last one, we'll wrap on these last two relievers. This is a deep cut. And this is someone that Jeff Cohen and I, when we were in Kannapolis, we fell in love with this guy watching him pitch 2 games in that same week that we were there. 6'9", undrafted free agent Carson Jacobs. Carson Jacobs is, 6'9", you're like, oh, this guy's going to pump velocity, right? Like, he's got some velo, but his fastball is not the bread maker.
Nope.
We watched him in Kannapolis throw a pitch that we couldn't figure out what it was. I asked Dan Haloti, who's the broadcaster there in Canny, and he was like, I've talked about the pitch with him before a little, and then we talked to him after. It's a split change, splitter maybe, question mark.
Yeah.
One of the funkiest pitches I saw last year in minor league baseball and was absolutely disgusting. 58 strikeouts across 38 innings for Carson Jacobs last year between Arizona, Kannapolis, and then Winston. This is a guy that was undrafted, shot his way up from, to Kannapolis midseason. He had through 8 games in Kannapolis, allowing 1 run across 10 1/3 innings, gets bumped again to Winston as a guy who was just undrafted, right? Goes 5 games in Winston to finish the season, allows 1 run and 3 hits across 5 1/3, another 9 strikeouts there. It's just going to be command for Jacobs as a big reliever with this funky split change thing that he's got going on. If he can command that pitch and he can kind of use his fastball in a pinpoint way, mix that with a breaking ball, this guy is gross. I love the stuff. I think he's, a super, super nice guy. Really seems like someone who, could rise quickly as a 23-year-old reliever with one of the most unique pitches I watched all of last season. So that was my last guy to finish on there.
Yeah, I absolutely love that pick. The splitter is just it comes from like such a high arm angle.
It's so
like,
funky. Yeah.
It just goes straight down too. Like from that arm angle, you wouldn't expect a pitch to like start above you and end in the dirt. Like it's so funky, and I love it too. But my final pick is my final of 6 2024 draftees. I didn't realize how many I put on this list until just now.
We're hoping they break out this year, right?
Yeah,
it's the first full season. Yeah,
I liked a lot of the picks, but my final pick is 11th rounder Blake Shepherdson out of San Francisco.
Yeah,
he's another guy that we liked initially and still like to this day. He's got a power sinker that he runs up to upper 90s, can touch 100 at times. Has a filthy sweeper. It gets like 16 inches of horizontal movement, and it's hard too. It's like in the upper to mid to upper 80s. Like it's very good. And the biggest thing with Shepherdson is just being able to find command. Like he was in the MLB draft league and showed some of that command, but in college he was a bit all over the place. And for a reliever, it's similar to first baseman. Like they're allowed to whiff more. Relievers are allowed to walk more. But I think that if Shepherdson can just dial in on command and just simply blow hitters away with the sinker and then snap off a nasty sweeper, I think that he's going to be one of the guys that we look at in a couple of years that it's like, okay, this guy could be a future 8th inning man for the White Sox.
That would be awesome. I mean, the sinker is gross. I remember when he first got drafted, I wasn't really familiar with him at all. I think this is a guy who was not on many people's radars. But you look at the MLB draft league stuff when he got healthy after being really injured throughout his high school and college career. Right, hasn't really developed fully as a pitcher yet. The sinker has a ton of life to it, and as the velocity reaches that upper 90s velocity. If he can continue to kind of hone in on those off-speed pitches and stay healthy more than anything, this is a guy where it's like, if you haven't pitched that much,
exactly,
we haven't even seen what you could be, right? With the stuff he has, if he really can become a pitcher, it's an exciting arm for sure.
100%. And Mike Shirley seems to love him. Like I think it was like the Zoom call after day 3 or whatever. He was like the guy that he was talking about the most out of any player that was drafted by the White Sox. And I mean, we took him in the 11th round for a reason. Like he was first pick of day 3 for us.
Yeah.
So I'm really
100%.
excited to watch all these guys.
Yeah, I'm fired up, man. This was fun. I think we were going through a ton of guys. There's even more guys, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a good chance a lot of these guys we just talked about are not going to have the best season. That's the
Hmm.
possibility with prospects. That's the guys we're talking about. But there is a lot of names to watch in this system. It's not just the top prospects. We're going to be doing this all season. Dylan,
Oh yeah.
myself, Jeff, we are going to be here to look at the minor league performances, who's doing well, who's struggling, who's doing, who's breaking out, who's looking incredible, who's kind of building on their last season, right? Like we're going to do this all season. Stick with us at FutureSox. We've got our top 30, staff ranking coming out soon. Top 30 White Sox prospects. We'll have our individual top 30s coming out a few weeks after that one. Spring training stuff is starting. We're going to start to see games next week. I will be out there with Jeff as well the whole first week of March. We're going to be talking to guys. We're going to be watching things. It's a lot of stuff to come. We're really excited for a great 2025 season.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I can't wait to do more of these as the season goes on because it's going to be a fun season. It might not be the best, but it is going to be fun. I'm going to make it.
It will
better.
be fun, and we will make it fun if it's
Exactly.
not already. We're super excited. That's been a great episode of the Roundup. Thanks for joining me, Dylan, and we'll be back soon with more.